Hey, Lulu here. Whether we are romping through science, music, politics, technology, or feelings, we seek to leave you seeing the world anew. Radiolab adventures right on the edge of what we think we know, wherever you get podcasts.
This is All of It. I'm Kusha Navidar in for Allison Stewart. Hey, happy Friday. I'm excited about the 3-day weekend, but I'm really excited to be here with you today. Coming up on the show, we'll speak with singer-songwriter Ani DeFranco. We'll get advice about how to grow great tomatoes, and we want to know what you're doing this weekend. That's the plan, so let's get this started. It's not every day that you get to say a line like my next guest. True, because there are no visual cues on the radio. You kind of have to introduce the guest, but I'm guessing this keyboard riff is giving you a clue. The song is, of course, What a Fool Believes, and it was co-written by singer Michael McDonald, who performed it in 1979 with his band, the Doobie Brothers. It's also the title of his new memoir, in which he looks back on his childhood in Missouri. He describes starting his music career as a preteen, dropping out of high school to play gigs, and breaking through as a backup singer with an instantly recognizable sound. It also deals with intensely personal and painful episodes in his life, like getting his 8th grade girlfriend pregnant and struggling with drugs and alcohol for years before becoming sober. Michael McDonald joins me now to discuss What a Fool Believes, which he co-wrote with Paul Reiser. Michael, welcome to All of It. Hi.
Hi, how are you, Kusha?
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to dive right into the memoir. What made now the right time for you to write this memoir?
Probably first and foremost, I was afraid if I waited 5 years, I wouldn't remember half of it. Quite a few years ago, maybe 20 years ago or so, I had an aunt who was in her late 80s then, but had a memory like a steel trap. She was the one person in the family who remembered everyone's blood type. If somebody went to the hospital, she could tell the doctors their whole medical history. She was amazing. And so I gave her for Christmas one year one of those writing pads you put on your lap and some kind of an instructionary course in writing your own life story and family history, and hoping that she, of all people, would do that for the rest of us and our grandkids, because she always told the stories. She had a great wit, and they were intriguing stories just by nature of the times they occurred during the Depression, and when people really had to live by their wits, during the First World War, and all those experiences in the 20s, and 30s, and but she never got around to it, and I always regretted that. I I didn't encourage her more, or even help her more to do that. So when this came up and Paul suggested I do this, I said, I thought about it, but I never knew where to begin. He said, well, let me help you, and he was an incredible help. His resourcefulness and his talents as a writer.
Yeah, and you write in the acknowledgement section that your co-author, Paul Reiser, is quite, to quote, possibly the one most responsible for its existence. Tell us the story behind that collaboration. How did it come to be?
One of the more endearing qualities about my friend Paul is that he is truly, genuinely interested in almost everyone he meets. He's got that writer, actor, comedian mentality where, studying people is part and parcel his, he's doing that all the time, much like I'm probably writing songs all the time. With our friendship, it would no less, he was always, saying, well, what about the Steely Dan? And he was a big fan of 70s music, having grown up in that era along with the rest of us. Was always asking me questions about Steely Dan, the Doobies early on, and how was it that you were in both bands almost at the same time? I said, well, so I would tell him all these what I thought were funny stories, and he just loved all that, and said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, well, I have, but I just didn't know where to begin. So having written 3 bestsellers himself, he decided to help me.
What was the process like for that? Like, did you write together? Did he draw
We,
the story
we,
out of you?
we mostly talked every day during the pandemic. We had nowhere to go, either one of us, because we weren't working, So we decided, we'd been friends for years already, but hadn't really seen each other that much over the years as we would now come to almost every day on Zoom, much like we're doing right now. But he basically interviewed me for the better part of a year or more, thinking of all the things he would want to ask me. And then we used like a kind of a transcribing software. And from that, he, in longhand, transcribed everything we talked about. So the book is really basically just very much a feel of our conversations,
Yeah.
as we went. Many times he would say, I would go off and write something and I'd bring it back to him, which was typically our exercise. And he would say, this needs to come later in the book, or, or this could, he would help me cut and paste a lot of stuff. And he would send it to me after he, cut and paste the things I'd written. And my first reaction was always, oh, no, that's ruining my flow, man, but I would always make myself read it twice, and inevitably the second time I read it, I would go, oh yeah, I get it. And I would agree with his, his editing, and his idea for how it should flow,
It's so special to have that collaborative relationship. I mean, it in music as well as anyone, but also in writing, be able to have somebody to bounce ideas off of and help kind of, you're saying, guide you through that. And you talk about the order of the book. The book opens with you being arrested in Van Nuys in 1971 at the age of 19. And it wasn't your first time being taken down to the station. What made you want to begin with one of your low points?
What more perfect place to start than it was basically kind of the lowest point in my life, and I was still only in my early 20s, if I was even 20 at that point, feeling pretty much like I had passed my prime and I tripped and kind of missed my star, so to speak, that I had gone out to California to find, to hitch myself to. And that was a good place to start the story because it has a lot to do with what the story is about. And I was glad to do that because I felt like that was probably the best way for the story to come out. It was from my perspective. I think in the end, what the story became was more and more universal as we went, because it wasn't really so much about dates and places and people, places and things in the music business, which would have been kind of like kind of a Forrest Gump kind of approach, which I love that movie, by the way. But I mean, that wasn't really what I wanted to do as much as just kind of connect with the reader on the things that they probably could relate to very easily, that are pretty much universal for all of us. And that is the randomness of life, how things, for all our best plans, laid plans, it's not going to go that way. And what we really find along the way is we have to teach ourselves to grab the opportunities as they come and as they present themselves, be light on our feet, when I was about the business of blowing everything in my life up, I still had these moments of great fortune that for some reason, even in the midst of my, victim of my own best thinking at that point, I was able to kind of recognize that, I just got to say yes here. I just got to go to that audition and see, whatever happens, happen. And, I'd gone to plenty of auditions and didn't take them very long to tell me I didn't have the job, So it was an interesting story for me, the fact that I went down to, once my friend called me, said, I told the band about you and they'd like you to come down and audition. I said, well, great. When? Just like now, So I threw my piano in the car and went down to this rehearsal hall and No one said anything other than they were teaching me the songs. And usually I had time to rehearse somebody's material before I showed up to audition for them.
Which band is this, by the way? Which band is this?
Steely Dan.
Steely Dan. Yeah, I figured. Yeah, to go more into that story. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, about a half hour into this, audition, I'm thinking, well, I haven't been thrown out yet, or asked, told that, I'm not really working out. I don't really know what this means. And, I just kept learning the songs, and pretty much 2, 3, 4 hours later, I realized, well, this is a full blown rehearsal, and I guess I got the job, as near as I could tell, and we met the next day for rehearsal, and by the next day it was obvious that I was going to go on tour with this band.
Why do you think you got that job? You write that it's because you could hit the high notes. And I know that, the Steely Dan co-founders, the late Walter Becker and the still alive Donald Fagen, are known as being intensely meticulous. What do you think they heard in you that made them say, all right, let's keep rehearsing?
I think that was one of the big factors. Donald seemed to be tickled with the fact that I could sing the high parts in a kind of a full voice, I could reach the high notes, without going into an obvious falsetto, that appealed to him and Walter both. My piano playing, I don't think got me the job. I don't think my piano playing got me too many jobs, really. I played well enough to kind of cover with Donald's tutelage and, him showing me how he would play the piano parts. Back then, I had a much better memory, from playing top 40 gigs and learning a lot of songs quickly,
Mm-hmm.
But, I was always able to cover holding down the piano part, or at least the comp part of the piano. I was never much for soloing myself. I always would break out in a rash if somebody wanted me to take a solo. I actually did take a solo in Steely Dan, and to this day I wake up in a cold sweat over that one. But,
was that really stressful for you?
Well, yeah, I just never considered myself a virtuoso on the piano. I was just a songwriter who could play pretty well, could get around in a couple of keys, so I was really, going to school on their dime. And I learned so much from Donald as far as reharmonization of chords and simple voicings that sounded great. And I admired him so much that, I was about 20 or something then. And I still remember those nights of being on stage with him. It hasn't changed much, even in later years. I've just always, playing his music was one of the best educations. Playing him and Walter's music, I should say, was one of the best educations I got as a piano player.
You write that when you sang background vocals on their 1975 album, Katie Lied, that Becker and Fagen got the idea that you would sing all the harmonies, and I would love to listen to one of the songs from the album. Here's Bad Sneakers. The first voice we hear is Donald Fagen singing lead, but then you come in with the harmony. Let's listen to it. Michael McDonald, the musician, and now the author of What a Fool Believes, which he co-wrote with Paul Reiser. Michael, you continue to work with Steely Dan on their 1977 album, Aja. You write that the harmonies on the chorus for Peg were so closely clustered, it was hard for you to learn it. How did you learn it?
Well, I wasn't that sophisticated of a background singer or choral singer, and the chords, the intervals were pretty close. Some of them like a whole step or half step apart. Now somebody in Manhattan Transfer or Take Six or one of those, those guys do that stuff all day long. I wasn't that good. I find
that so hard to believe. You're one of the most sophisticated singers in the history of American music. That's very humble of you to say, but I just want to point that out.
Well, not really, but thank you. So I said to Donald, I said, I'm having trouble keeping pitch on some of these harmonies because I hear myself, so close in the next harmony down that it's throwing me. I said, is there any way we could record this? You just sing me the part, let me memorize it, and without hearing the other parts, I'll put each of them down, and then I'll double it. So that's what we did, and I remember the first time he played it back, and I thought, wow, that just sounds so cool,
And what does double it mean? Sorry to interrupt, but what is double
doubling is like, you sing a part, and then you go to a separate, another track and sing the same part. And then in playback, when they bring it up, it creates that kind of deeper, more ethereal phasing that you hear in the voices, and especially if you sing with yourself. That's the trick that Donald seemed to be on to when we did Bad Sneakers. He purposely wanted me to sing all the parts and then double them because he had some kind of idea that might be a sound. And as it turns out, it kind of was. It was almost more like it had more a reedy quality of a pump organ or something rather than human voice or a keyboard of some kind. So it was almost like an instrument more collectively than the sum of its parts, or the individual parts. It was more the sum of the parts that became kind of an instrument. And so it was really fun. I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, wow, I had done that before myself as a cost saving measure on demos, where I would just sing if I had enough tracks, I would just sing all the parts and harmonize with myself because I couldn't afford girl singers, Yeah. I had heard myself before like that, but not quite the way they did it, and as hi-fi as they seemed to accomplish it. It was really, kind of struck me as quite beautiful, and it was something that other people hired me to do for backgrounds for other records later on. They always it kind of became a sound that I was kind of known for in background singing circles. A lot of people would hire me just to come in and make up background parts and sing with myself just to get that sound.
Well, let's
with the Doobies, I went on to use that too.
Well, before we get to the Doobies, I would love to hear a little bit about that brand that you're talking about. Let's listen to some of Peg before we go to it. Famous song. What do you think we should be listening for right now as we go into it, Michael?
Well, for me, what I found interesting about it was Donald's, arrangement, and I think by then those guys were kind of jettisoning into another dimension. Musically, they were starting to embrace more complex chordal progressions and chord voicings, and usually when most sessions you do, and you're singing background on a record, it's like the typical 1-3-5. Relationship and the harmonies for the backgrounds, typical chords, triads usually. Rare when somebody would use 4 singers or 5 singers and put, more complex intervals in there. But Donald, was starting to write these background parts that were more like piano chord voicings or violin voicings, if you will, where he would avoid purposely the kind of major triad sounding harmony parts, and so that the backgrounds, they would have all the rhythmic value and arrangement value that background vocals would have at that moment, but the chords themselves were more interesting.
It's so interesting to say that you're not that sophisticated as a singer, and yet here you are saying, oh, well, the chords that we tried to make are not your normal triad chords. There's something much more sophisticated, maybe. Let's listen to a little bit. And we're back with singer Michael McDonald. His new memoir is titled What a Fool Believes. Michael, before the break, we were talking about how in the 1970s you toured with Steely Dan and sang backup for them. But when their tour ended, you were kind of at loose ends until you got an invitation to join the Doobie Brothers. And you write that you had 2 days to learn their songs before going on tour. What was that experience like?
Hectic, in a lot of ways. The travel was, I got the call through a mutual friend, a girl that I played with a lot, who was a great bass player, Brandy Bento, called me one day. She said, Jeff Baxter's trying to get a hold of you. He gave me his number. So I called him right away, and I knew he was on the road with the Doobie Brothers. And Steely Dan had, by then ceased to tour, and Donald and Walter had pretty much, pared the whole thing down to just the 2 of them. So when Jeff called me, he goes, man, we're out here, one of the principals, Tommy Johnson, who's, responsible for so many of the songs. And he's really, the kind of like the front guy of the band along with Pat. He goes, is just, he's in bad shape physically. He's got to go home. He's suffering, he's got to have some surgery, I think it was. He said, can you be in New Orleans in 2 days? I mentioned that you play keyboards, and we thought, well, it would be good if we're going to get somebody to get a keyboard player at this point, because we've got 3 guitar players. We're okay there. And a lot of keyboards figured pretty heavily on a lot of their records, but they never used them live. So I said, sure, and I said, I don't have a whole lot of money right now in the bank, so I don't know how I'll get down there. He goes, no, there's a ticket waiting for you, and I'll explain the rest when you get here. So I picked up this ticket at the airport, my Wurlitzer baggage, in a case, and that said Steely Dan on it. I showed up in New Orleans at the warehouse where they were rehearsing, hoping to rehearse enough with me to go out and finish this tour. Hopefully to avoid canceling like months worth of dates, 2 or 3 months worth of dates. So, and right away I was amazed. I was kind of taken back by the power of the band, how they, all this stuff sounded so different live. And it was, there was a lot more, like I say, power and emotion to the live set, than I was aware of, And here I am with this little Wurlitzer, it's like bringing a water gun to the OK Corral, Right. But I found a way to amplify it. I really enjoyed the Doobie songbook, I really missed and really looked forward to this farewell tour, reunion tour. For that reason alone, really, just to get back and play these songs again.
Yeah, and you contributed to that songbook too. I mean, the first song you wrote for the Doobie Brothers is "Takin It to the Streets," and you say that you wanted to write with what you thought could pass for a traditional gospel song. Did that song come out the way that you wanted?
Well, it immediately turned into something else when I played it for the Doobies. I think originally when I wrote it, I even thought about recording it in a church with a big choir and like the kind of rhythm section you would find in church, but to get that ambience of to me, gospel music. I grew up listening to a station late at night on Sunday night as a kid. When my mother thought I was asleep, I had my little Japanese transistor radio under my pillow, and I could pick up late at night. I could pick up this station from Nashville. And it was a gospel station, and the guy would record different choirs around Nashville area during the Sunday services, and then he would compile his playlist of the stuff he thought was the most interesting or the best performances that day. And I always remember thinking, I love rock and roll, but there's nothing more powerful and more urgent and more emotional than gospel music. It kind of, to me, beat rock and roll hands down as far as just pure passion, and I always loved it, but where the band took it was so much more of a rock influenced feeling, still kind of gospel. The song just had an inherent gospel nature, but now it was something else. It was a more of a kind of a energetic rock tune, and I dug it immediately. It was like one of those moments where, when you play back something you've done and, you think, I think we got something here, and I'll never forget that just that instant when it was the first time I really realized that "Taking It to the Streets" was a Doobie Brothers song.
Yeah. And also kind of to your point, it's the sum that's more than the parts combined. And I think that's a great place to I really love it. This is WNYC, all of it. I'm Kushan Avidar, and we're here with Michael McDonald, the musician and author of What a Fool Believes, which he co-wrote with Paul Reiser. Michael, we talked about this at the start of the conversation, but you spent a lot of time battling drugs and alcohol and hit a real low point in the 1980s. What turned things around for you?
One of the more frightening aspects of addiction, and I don't think people who aren't addicts understand all that well, is when you realize that if you could muster all the willpower in the cosmos into a moment, it probably still wouldn't be enough to beat this compulsion, this obsession, that has taken on a physical and mental grip over you, And once you realize that I'm not going to beat this, and it's going to kill me, it has to get to that for that, in that moment of surrender to the truth of it all, and acceptance that for anything positive to happen, and you hit those bottoms, and you, until that moment of surrender happens where you go, well, I give up. Once you get there, it's like that's where you begin to be able to do something about it. That mental space is so elusive, and it's not where we naturally go. It's kind of like raising kids. We want to control every aspect of their lives and rescue them from every pitfall they might happen on. Certain things don't come natural to us. Surrender does not come natural to
right. That we talk about that big shift in mindset, and you talk about parenting, and when you think about now on this side of your journey, looking back through your childhood, which had so much happening in the world of parenting. There was a girl who you got pregnant, you dropped out of high school, and now you have this gift of time and perspective. I'm wondering, with that new perspective, how do you look back on it all?
It doesn't get any easier. It's hard, and it's maybe even harder because I can't hide from it. I don't have drugs and alcohol to hide behind. I have to look at these things squarely and accept my failings, and my selfishness, my irresponsibility. I have to own it, and the fact that still doesn't change it. I still can't go back and do it differently. It'll always be there. But what was once a secret I would hope to take to the grave with me is now something that maybe I can help another person with who's suffering from, we all have those things, those deep, dark secrets that haunt us, that we wish we had done differently, and we wish we had been better people,
For you, can you touch on that secret a little bit? Is this a secret you still carry? Are you talking about drugs for you, or the getting
well, a lot of
pregnant?
it was my behavior behind drugs, but even before my full blown drug addiction, like in the case of Diane, my first girlfriend, I have to look back and it's not a picture of myself that I am proud of. I was 14. I can make all kinds of excuses for myself. We were young. We were scared. We were a lot of things. But most of all, what I got to accept is that I was a coward. I abandoned her. When her parents made the decision that she would give up the baby, I disassociated from the whole thing, and I rationalized that as well. They don't want to see me around anyway, But really, I look back with deep regret, because had I stepped up, even at 14, I'd be looking back at something that I was glad I did, as opposed to all these years later looking back at something that I'm very ashamed of. Been a hard thing for me to reconcile,
It's a story of enormous growth is part of what I'm hearing as well. If you're just joining us, listeners, this is All of It on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar. I'm lucky to be talking to Michael McDonald, the musician and author of What a Fool Believes, which he co-wrote with Paul Reiser. Michael, we were talking about your childhood, really, when you were 14. By that point, you were already performing as a musician, and your voice, both unorthodox but also instantly recognizable, especially when you hit the high registers. How did you discover that? Was that something that was there at 14, or was it further along the path for you musically?
The voice is an instrument, and I think any singer will tell you this, that you negotiate as you go through life. You negotiate it with it because it changes, with age. And I sing differently today than I sang when I was in my 20s. A lot of what I could do in my 20s in my higher range, I probably can't do today. But I look for what strengths I have left as a singer, and I try to, aim at those when I'm singing a song.
We're talking about how your voice it changes over time. It's something you negotiate, as you said. I'd love to play a song from one of your Motown albums and connect it to that. This is your cover of I'm Gonna Make You Love Me, which was performed by Diana Ross and the Supremes and also the Temptations. Let's take a quick listen to it. It's changing over time now for you.
I'm not sure, it's kind of a thing you go by feel more than anything, The one thing I always notice when I'm singing and I'm feeling like, for some reason it's like your golf swing, when you're swinging too hard, you're less likely to hit the ball, I when I feel like I'm struggling in a live situation, the first thing I say to myself is, okay, relax, let your posture relax. You're more likely to hit these notes a little better if you don't overswing at it, and try too hard, because I think what I find is my range and my ability to feel the song comes easier, or I achieve more by relaxing than I do by tightening up. Anymore, I found what works best for me as a singer is to hit the two lowest notes I can make a sound with. And they're, just a step from each other, two notes, the two lowest notes I got, and just pivot back and forth while tightening my muscles here and just kind of doing this is going to be ugly, but it's like a and what that does is it loosens up all those muscles I'm going to need later, my vocal cords, just starting with that. And by hitting the two lowest notes and just concentrating on that, not going up and trying to hit the highest notes I can hit, I'll probably be better prepared to hit those notes later when I need to than I would if I tried to hit them in the dressing room.
You're on first of all, thank you for giving us a Michael McDonald first right there. I feel like we just got a little.
It's like, now you know why I don't make any money as a voice teacher.
You're on a press tour right now. You're talking to a lot of folks. Is there anything that you wish you had been asked so far, or something that you feel like you really want to expound upon that you haven't been asked yet in the press tour?
I guess I would want to say or express what it feels like to be back with the band, at this point in my life, all of us, to a man, I think I can speak for when I say, I don't think any of us dreamed in a million years when we were in our 20s doing this, traveling the world doing this,
And this is with the Doobie Brothers, right, that you're saying?
Yeah, or Steely Dan, Donald, and Walter. But any of us at any time when we were in our 60s and we were still playing on stage together, I don't think any of us dreamed we'd be doing this in our 70s, and much less taking the stage together still in our 70s. So we all have a real sense of gratitude, especially for the audiences who have come out year after year for 50 plus years to hear the band play. I feel like we know them. I feel like whoever they are, if they've been coming to see us that long, they know us better than we know ourselves, probably, and the fact that they still want to come and hear us play is something that is a great source of gratitude for all of us. So we've all been doing this most of our lives, and the fact that we get the privilege to do it in our 70s and still get to walk out there on stage is not lost on us at all. And after all these years, what has really come to the surface as the most important aspect of it for us in our group is our friendships. That's the most valuable commodity we have at this point, that we get to see each other in that setting, as we're about to walk out on stage and do it one more time is kind of hard to put into words, really.
But you put into music every night, I'm sure.
We try.
Yeah, you try. I'm sure you do a great job of it too. We've been lucky to talk to Michael McDonald, who is a musician and author of What a Fool Believes, which he co-wrote with Paul Reiser. Michael, thank you so much for being with us.
Gersha, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.